Dying to be Stuckmocky, Chapter 25. Mirrin loses sight. "Well, this should be interesting," observed Fahyrjeon, stopping in its tracks and pulling Mirrin's hood lower over his face. "What should?" asked Vira, stopping too and noticing the slight tension in her friend's hand. Vira saw a movement out of the corner of her eye and rapidly turned her head to see what it was, but there was nothing there, only the muted colours of the grassy plain, with the occasional smudge of a shadowy tree or bush into the distance. Odd. Then there was a movement on the other side of her. A rapid head turn produced the same result. Nothing but grass and a scattering of trees. OK, next movement, she decided. She'd rely on her peripheral vision, as she'd found that worked better under moonlight, although this close to dawn it was a lot brighter than mere moonlight. Vera stared straight ahead of her, while Fahyrjeon and Vira grunted and chuckled and made a varied assortment of Stuckmocky noises to each other over her head. Movement. Don't look. Just stare at the horizon. Without actually turning her eyes to the large, dark shape, Vira paid attention to it. It slowly began to make visual sense, but she couldn't stop herself from looking towards it, and it immediately disappeared. Well, that was weird. She could have sworn she saw something that looked like a Stuckmocky not far away, but there was nowhere for a 2.5-metre tall festival of fur to hide in this landscape. Suddenly she was bowled over backwards by a collision from something waist-high and very solid. Her head hit the ground with a thump, while her legs were pinned down by what seemed to be a snarling savage beast. "Help!" she heard her terrified voice scream. Her vision cleared a little from the impact to reveal Fahyrjeon standing over her smiling. Smiling? The insensitive so-and-so. "My apologies. Us Brogs can be a little enthusiastic," Fahyrjeon said. Vira raised her stunned head to look down at the struggling weight of orange-brown furry creature on her legs. A miniature Stuckmocky face looked back at her. The body stopped struggling while the face gazed with rapture into her eyes. Then the Sprog cautiously raised a furry finger and gently inserted it into her nostril. "Fahyrjeon!" Fahyrjeon leaned down and lifted the Sprog off her, throwing it across her shoulder as it stood up. The Sprog wasted no time in swinging itself around Fahyrjeon's neck, clambering up on its head, then turning and lowering itself down the furry chest and legs, like someone climbing down a palm tree. Fahyrjeon continued speaking as though nothing unusual were happening. "It seems Wishoa here has broken the ice. I was a little concerned about the clan's reaction to 2 humans. Your species doesn't have the best of reputations amongst Stuckmocky, as you can imagine." Vira raised herself further onto an elbow and rubbed the back of her head with her other hand. "I have such trouble staying vertical in this world." As Mirrin helped her to her feet again, she saw dark, elusive shapes moving around in the middle distance. "Is that your clan I keep almost seeing? How are they doing that?" "Doing what?" asked Mirrin, looking warily all around himself. "It's a form of mental camouflage," replied Fahyrjeon, "achieved through the energy of the group mind overwhelming an individual mind. I'm surprised you can see anything at all." "This one can see an échange," reminded Vira. "Yes, of course," mused Fahyrjeon. "More magic," muttered Mirrin. At that moment, Fahyrjeon, Vira and Wishoa all shimmered slightly. Mirrin gasped, then turned and looked all around himself. "Where did they go?" "They're right here. Can't you see them?" asked Vira with surprise. "No," retorted Mirrin. "They became invisible. Of course I cannot see them." "But they're not—" "Oh, maybe they are," said Vira. She took hold of Mirrin's hand and placed it on Fahyrjeon's arm. Mirrin pulled his hand off in shock and backed away. "I do not like an enemy I cannot see." "Mirrin, you don't mean that!" Mirrin began fumbling with his robe, and Vira realised with horror that he was trying to reach the sword hidden underneath. "No, Mirrin, these are our friends!" She lunged forward and threw her arms tightly around him so he would have to choose between throwing her to the ground or giving up his fumbling. "We do not know that," he growled, reluctantly falling still. "We do not know the reaction of any of these beasts. If they are so friendly, why are they hiding and skulking about? We must be prepared for an attack should it come." "There will be no need for an attack if there is no danger," came Fahyrjeon's quiet voice. "So there is the possibility of hostility. How many do you see, Vira?" Mirrin was starting to sound panicky. "Mirrin, we have to trust them. I trust Fahyrjeon, and it's telling us we'll be all right if we stay calm." "You don't understand, Vira," said Mirrin in a rising voice, his polished tones rapidly disappearing. "You haven't fought these beasts in the arena. They're savage, tricky, unpredictable. Many times I've come close to losing a battle against one. Many times I've been badly injured." His breathing was heavy and fast, and sweat covered his face. Keeping her arms firmly around Mirrin, Vira lay her head on his shoulder and murmured soothingly, I know, but you've always won, haven't you?" "Yes, of course I have. I am Mirrin, fearless fighter." Mirren's whole bearing suddenly sagged as these triumphant words fell from his mouth. Vira felt two large furry bodies press against her as she continued to pin Mirren's arms to his sides. At first she couldn't understand what was happening, but when she heard Fahyrjeon talk loudly in Stuckmocky above her, then heard the sound of voices responding from some distance, she wondered if she and Mirrin weren't being given some kind of seal of approval. She felt a smaller body start pressing against her legs, and figured weyrshofft was back. It pushed her away from Mirrin by inserting itself between them, and Vira was forced to release her hold. She looked down and saw weyrshofft lifting the hem of Mirren's robe to study the fabric with great curiosity. It then pulled it over the back of its head and turned to grin up at her with delight through a makeshift hood. Vira briefly grinned back, then turned to see what she could make of the other members of the clan, now that Mirrin had given up his struggle. Several rather transparent Stuckmocky were cautiously approaching, becoming more distinct as they got closer. Fahyrjeon and Vira were both talking rapidly to them, and thankfully Vira could hear a mutual chuckling of consensus starting all around her. Suddenly, however, all the approaching Stuckmocky froze and stared in horror at her. Or was it something next to her? She turned and looked down to see that weyrshofft had lifted Mirren's robe up to the waist, revealing his gladiator tunic and the full length of the gleaming sword stuck through his leather belt.